Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Beyond Recovery. My name is Matt. My guest today is Zach Mathers. So, Zach is a life coach, addiction recovery coach, and the host of the podcast Braving the Journey. So, joining me from Maui, Hawaii, Zach, how are you today?
I'm good, Matt. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here. I'm excited just to get a chance to talk with you guys and everything you got going on. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate it. And yeah, I was lucky enough to be a guest on your podcast a couple of weeks back, and it was just as you were coming off a pretty busy summer of traveling. Back in the States, you came off the island there and came back into civilization, as it were, different civilization, of course.
Yes.
And yeah, you're getting back going with the show here. So I want to start with that. I really enjoyed your show. I find you, as a very welcoming host, and you have a really gifted way of summarizing, what your guests say and kind of giving it some framework before you move on from it. So, shout out for you on that, and just want to promote your,
Thanks.
your
Yeah.
podcast there, Braving the Journey, really good show. So highly recommend that. How did that show come about? Yeah, just sort of the origins of your podcast.
Yeah. So the origins of my podcast kind of come into the origin, or the process of my drinking story too. If I was looking at the podcast, I think for me, in the core of who I am, I think I've known that there's always this desire inside of me to speak and communicate. And I'll back up my story in a little bit, but I basically for a long time in my life felt like I was uh, disqualified, if you would say, like from having a voice that would impact the world at all.
Mm.
And so I believed that lie for so many years. And when I finally began to wrestle through it and stop believing the lie, that's kind of when the idea of the podcast kind of came into play. And I did. I recorded 2 episodes with guests. I asked them to share their story, and I wasn't even sure where it was going. I just knew I wanted a show that would um, help impact people. And so it came out of the idea that I believe that we as humans all struggle, whether it's with alcohol, whether it's with porn addiction, whether it's with just being an angry person. I don't care. Like, we all struggle in life. But the reality is I believe when we struggle with whatever it is, maybe it's not even like we're mourning a loss or whatever the struggle is. We have a tendency, I think, to move towards a place of isolation versus stepping into community.
Mm.
And so we almost believe the lie of like, oh, I'm the only one struggling with this issue, so therefore I'm going to isolate myself and deal with it on my own.
Mm.
Versus stepping into this idea of like, no, like I'm not alone. There's others that struggle. So I'm going to step into a place where I can step in the community and learn from others and them learn from me, and we walk through it together. And so that was the heartbeat of my podcast. Was like I wanted a space where people could hear stories and go, oh, I'm not alone, and then I can do something with that.
It's beautiful.
So
Yeah. Have you been how have you been finding that as far as like so what I'm hearing you say is, you're is there a community that's sort of based on everybody you've had networking? Like, is there something that is attached to like a Facebook
I
group or anything like that, or
not as much as I want, but I
yeah.
also I also don't know. I don't know if the podcast Braving the Journey is in a whole going to be the community space, but I think what it is it's the initial spark for somebody that maybe has been in isolation, that has been struggling with their struggle alone. They hear a story and then they go, oh, I could do it differently. And then they begin to in their area. Cause I still, as much as we have Zooms and Facebooks, all these different components, there's still something about a human to human interaction that to me, I'm more keen to go like, cool. Now you realize you don't want to walk this out alone. So find community, find it, do whatever it takes to find it in your area,
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where it sits. And so, yeah, it's funny because, for me, I think I recorded 2 episodes. I had no idea what I was doing. Literally, I bought, like the podcast kit off Amazon and was like, yeah, I think it sat in the box for like 9 months because I was like still not sure if I was going to do anything. And then
Yeah.
I I recorded 2 episodes, and I remember feeling a sense of like, man, I'm asking people to be very vulnerable and real with their own stories, and yet I wasn't willing to do my own. Like I
Mm.
wasn't willing to share mine,
Mm.
and so I shared this with my wife. And then that night I said, hey, why don't you be the host and I'll be your guest to my wife? And I was like, you ask me questions. And so we sat down and we put the kids to bed, sat down in the office, and she did. She just began to ask questions. And So then I ended up bumping that to become the first episode of the show, because I felt like if I'm not willing to be vulnerable and real, why should I ask guests to be?
Yeah, 100%. That sounds like that would be a big turning point for you. Is like after so you did the two
Yeah,
episodes, it's not quite clicking, and then you, like you say, you circle back, do yourself, put yourself as episode zero, if you will.
yeah.
Was that sort of the tide turner at that point? As soon as you were able to, and what was that like? For was there like any reservations about putting your story out there? Were you like, ooh, was there some degree of like wondering about censoring yourself? What was that process like?
I don't know. To be honest, I have I have a tendency to sometimes be the one that like dives into stuff and then processes it a little bit later. So
Yeah.
like I did, I put it out there, and then all of a sudden I sat back and I had this like awe of like, oh, that's out there in the world. Anybody could listen to that, you know.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
but it was there was I think there was a couple of feelings. There was a feeling of freedom, not just because I put it out there, but because I had worked for years to get to a place where I was comfortable in who I was, in my story and my struggles. Because if you would have asked me 3 years, 4 years prior to me putting that out there, I would have been like, no, I'm not. No, I don't talk about my struggle with alcohol. I don't talk about my past. Because I thought for some reason that would disqualified me.
Yeah, right. I want to get into this because you mentioned that the whole disqualification of having your own voice and such. Let's go back. Let's roll the clocks back to young man or even
Okay.
child Zach. Like what was your upbringing like? What led you down this path of viewing that you didn't have a voice that mattered? And yeah, get us into like your origin stories with alcohol.
Okay. So yeah, start. So I grew up in a home with parents that were very kind, loving. A sister and I have one sibling, and sister, and we were very close. And I had a good childhood. Like I really did. Like my mom was a marriage and family therapist, still is. My dad. So my mom and I had this relationship where we were able to um process. She was my go-to. I talked through life with her. And then my dad, on the other hand, it wasn't that we didn't have these deep conversations, but what we had was this like he had an adventurous side to play. And so he taught me how to play and enjoy life. And he was always the guy who's like, let's buy whitewater kayaks. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. Okay. And he's like, let's buy mountain bike. And so like we would play hard together. So I had this kind of beautiful, I mean, I really did. I feel very blessed. And like with all that, there's still always drama inside of a family. Like no family's perfect. But I had a really good family. And then I grew up, and I was kind of one of those people in high school, all the way stepping into college. Whatever I put my mind to, I kind of was able to accomplish it. And so, I think, yeah, I was kind of that natural leader in high school, kind of had, captain of the soccer team, went off into college, and, you know, it was there. I kind of struggled a little bit of like, where's my identity sit? But still kind of had this mentality of like, whatever I think I want to do works. I started a nonprofit when I was 20 years old, and we started filming short documentaries around the world and traveling. A year prior to that, I built my first house at like 19, sold it, started getting into the real estate game. And so everything was kind of working. Ended up meeting my wife at college. We got married really young. We got married at 21 years old. And so I went from running this nonprofit to we moved to Seattle to help start a church with a group of friends, and still running the nonprofit, still doing some house remodels and helping out with this church. And then my wife and I are about a year into our marriage. We ended up moving to a place called Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is a very popular place these days. Back then, people didn't know much about it. And that's kind of where I grew up. So we moved back to kind of hometown for me. And we ended up starting a church there. And so I'm 20 at this point. I'm like 22 years old, senior pastor or the lead pastor
Wow.
the church that's growing. And so we're growing. We're 150 people, and kind of the trendy little new church on the block, basically. And with that, this is where the point for me kind of started coming was I didn't know how to deal with the stress of feeling like I had to have it all figured out and all the answers for everybody, and knowing I didn't.
Mm.
And so I began to naturally go to a space of kind of isolating, and I isolated from that feeling, and I would avoid it. And I ended up about 3 years into our marriage. We're pregnant with our first kid on the way, and I ended up having an affair. Um, and so I'm living with this affair, and I'm living with this. And I don't even like the word affair because it sounds too pretty. Like, I cheated on my wife, and I I'm still trying to function. I'm still living, and so that's when my drinking started. Like I was, before then I could go have a beer, and that was all I needed. And I never really partied in high school, uh, but I came to a spot where what happened was I did something that was in my moral code of myself going, I'll never do that. That was one of those things like I'll never do this, and I did it. So then all of a sudden I'm left with this. Well, who am I? And I don't even know how to cope with myself. So I began to drink, and I'm still pastoring at this time. I'm still my brand new son is just born, and I'm trying to live with the shame, and so I end up finally one day just going, I'm willing to risk it all. I'm willing to risk everything I got because I can't live with it. And so I came home one day and told my wife, and I mean that day is ingrained inside of my mind. You know, she basically packed up our son. Um, said I'm leaving, got in the car, and I said, "Where are you going?" She goes, "I'm going to your parents' house." So I called my parents and I said, "Hey, here's what I did. My wife's on the way. Like, we'll talk about it later, but just take care of my wife and my son." And that kind of started this, you know, I still in all this, I'm drinking to just deal with my shame. Um, and a long story put short, you know, there was a long process and journey for my wife and I to kind of work it out, where I started personally seeing a counselor at that point and just started working through some of my stuff. It was my counselor that was the first one to say, "Hey, I think you got a problem with alcohol and you probably should, look at the AA or something." Um, and my wife and I were separated at the time. She ended up coming to Hawaii because her parents were out here. She came to Hawaii with our son, and um, it took a long time. It took a long time, but she came to a spot where she was willing to go, "Hey, I'll meet with you with a counselor. I'll do
Mm.
that." And then we began to meet. And then after meetings and times, I moved back into the house and I slept in the guest bedroom for a while. And, this is my story and our journey. And what I've learned is uh, everyone's story is different when it comes to affairs and cheating and all that. And so, but this is my story. And it did. We worked really hard. And we've been married now 17 years. And yeah, so we worked our tails off, and we still do. We still are learning and growing, but there was a long process. But here's what happened with the alcohol. Even though my marriage is being restored, but there was a point where literally I lost my job as a pastor. I lost my wife. I lost my son. Uh, I lost my community because that was the people that knew me. So I was at this spot where I was broken to the point of like, I got nothing. Um, but now we kind of rebuild and things are getting better and you know but what happened was alcohol stuck, you know as much like now all of a sudden having a drink just couldn't happen. It was like I'd have one and I knew I wanted to get to the effects of how it made me feel, and so I would have more and more and more, and that became my little secret in life where I would drink before I came home, or I wasn't your daily drinker. I would sometimes I'd go weeks without it, and other times I'd be on like a 3 day repetitive drink, feel hungover the next day, promise myself I'll never do it again, and then third day drink and go, what am I doing? And I would cycle that cycle. Um, yeah, and so that was kind of that's kind of the story. And then when you step into the recovery side of the story for me, I wasn't somebody that got it right away. I wasn't somebody that walked into the rooms of AA and said, "I'm never going to drink again," and didn't. I relapsed on and off over and over for about 8 years. Um, and for at the beginning, when I would relapse, I had so much shame attached to that because I believed this lie that, man, I can't even figure this out. I can't even successfully do this. Um, and so that would spiral me into the shame, which would cause more drinking, and I would get stuck in a cycle again. Um, but I was willing enough to go, I'm going to try whatever it takes, whether it's AA, outpatient programs, celebrate recovery. I was willing to just kind of look and go, what else can I try? And I think that is what worked for me, was going, I'm going to try everything until I can
Mm,
figure out, what do I need? Like, what do I need? I don't want to create someone. I don't want to do somebody else's program. I don't want to do it exactly how this person did. I needed to go. And, I think that was one element. And then two, really, it was the deep rooted shame I had to work through. Because
mm.
even the point when I was like, no, I've worked through it. At that point I hadn't. There was still more that I had to work through and deal with. So
Yeah, wow. That's a heck of a story. Thanks for being so honest about it.
yeah,
One of the first things that went through my head, it was, circling back to the fact that your wife interviewed you for episode one, and just the content, right? I'm like,
I
oof,
know.
I wonder how that went. I was curious. I'm gonna have to listen to it now. Just the dynamic, the obviously dynamic, right, of what you mentioned there. So that came
Yeah,
up. Yeah, dude, tricky, and yeah, it's one of those stories, like you say, a fairly, normal childhood for the most part, not without its drama, like you say, no family's perfect, but and then coming out of that, like almost like overachieving, or to a degree, like to have all that
yeah.
accomplished that early in your life, and then to have it all come crashing down, rebuilding, and here you are now, come out the other side, and just curious, like I imagine congrats on the 17 years for you and your wife.
Yeah.
It's like I imagine that there's so much more of a nuance and depth to your relationship now, considering how much you both of you have been through. Is that correct?
Oh yeah. I mean, like, the reality is I think the first 3 years of our marriage, we were living in this la la land, like everything was great and fine. And now we're comfortable being like, man, marriage is really hard, and man, we got to work on things. And I think because the road we had to walk, it forced us to learn new skills to be able to argue well together, to be able to have conflict and deal with it, to be able to create space to share our feelings and our emotions. Like, all those things, I don't know if it's funny, if I look back and I go, if I was headed in the same directory I was when I was 22 years old, uh, I think I on the outward projection of what the world sees, they'd be like, man, this guy does a lot of great stuff. How amazing. And I think there would have been a very shallow depth of knowing who I was inside.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm pretty happy that I got to walk my road, because I think honestly that it showed me and taught me, and it still is, and I'm still learning, but I'm still in this, like, I'm enjoying the fact that I can easily now be like, I am a broken, humbled human that's trying to just walk through this life that's really hard, and and be able to do that now and be okay with myself in that space, and then still be able to, like, from that same breath, be like, man, let's dream, let's create, let's do all that's beautiful. But it comes from, like, a different position than I think before. There was kind of a false humility that
Uh,
existed in me before.
yeah, for sure.
So
And it feels like you have this much more full-bodied, the yin and yang, the light and dark. You have, whereas like the path you had walked up to that point didn't have too much of the darkness, right? And then,
no.
you made up for it in spades there in those few years, and now all of a sudden you have this much more full-bodied,
Yeah.
just approach to life experience and all that. And I want to talk a little bit about some of your life experience you brought to your podcast, also to the coaching that you're doing as well. How much of your personal experiences have you been bringing towards that? Versus, when somebody comes to see you and obviously you meet them where they are. Yeah, I'm just curious, like how much of your own story comes up when you're coaching, or are you just so specific about, working through whatever they got going on? Yeah, what's like the dynamic there?
I think they're intertwined. I think it's hard not to intertwine in the regards that, like, my story is my story, which made me who I am, and I've learned a lot of the stuff I've learned that I apply to helping others is through my own journey. But one of the things I try really hard not to do, though, on the other side, though, is um, I don't ever want to say this is how I did it, so therefore that's how you have to. right? Because like,
Right.
um, now I believe that, like, my belief on us as humans is that we are all unique. Like there's nobody, Matt, that is in the world that is you, that has your same story, that has your same DNA, that is you. And so the reality is like we can glean and learn and pull from and gain wisdom and all these pieces, but like the reality is the way that you process it and comprehend it and figure out what applies to you and how it doesn't is only going to be through your lens and you. And like my biggest belief, like I try to like overall goal, like yes, let's help people stop drinking, but like if that's the end all, then what's it for? You know,
Sure.
and so my overall goal is to help people figure out who they are in their identity, because their identity is unique, that no one else in the world is them. And if people can learn to live inside of who they are meant to be in this world, then the world benefits. You know, like we need all of us to live to our full who we are meant to be in this space and this time, because when we do that, man, the world looks different.
Hell yeah. When you're talking about like identity, I want to do a little bit deeper dive into that. Like, is that looking at, what does the process look like as far as like when you're unpacking that with somebody? It's like, okay, what are your core values? Like, what is this lens that you're seeing the world
But
through?
I think there's tools. So I mean, like, you know, you every person can, like, I think there's great things, right? Like one of the exercises I always have people that I work with do is I have them picture their and they have them, I have them do this writing exercise, but I have them write out their funeral. And so
Mm.
I want them to write out every person, sit like my spouse, my kids, my coworkers, my neighbors, and what do I want them to say about me at the end of my life? Like
Mm.
what when they're doing that, what I want them to say
Yeah.
about who I am and who I'm meant to be. Uh, and then they write that out, and then we can read through it and look at it together, and then we can look at it and go, how do we reverse engineer our life so at the end we're doing something today that moves us towards that place, right? So we're
Yeah.
doing some small compound little steps today that's going to lead me up to people saying that when I die. And that's what's interesting is like, yeah, like there's always that generalized, like, I want people to say I was loving and caring and kind, and but there's uniqueness. There's always these little snippets of like things that people add that like, I want to be remembered by my kids as a silly, playful dad, or whatever it
Sure.
is. Uh, but there's little uniqueness that you go, those little snippets that are outside the scope or the norm that everyone kind of says, those kind of tie back to a little bit of their identity, and but I think identity is found in so many different. It's not one. It's not like you do this and you know your identity per se. It's like Enneagram, great tool, amazing tool that helps you kind of go, where do I fit in the numbers of who I am, right? And um, kind of reverse engineering from your funeral to now is a tool. But I think for me, the overarching one is, um, and whether people believe in God or not, or a creator or not, like it works for all people. But it's learning to be able to sit quietly and just ask the simple question of who am I? Like who am I? And then learning to hear that conscious voice inside of us speak who it is. Uh, because I think what we do is we listen to fear, we listen to shame, we listen to all these other things that let us define who we are. And we've learned we can identify the voice of fear and shame because it talks to us so much, and we have chosen to listen. So when we can learn to shut that down and like quiet that voice and let this voice of like ultimate love speak, then you can ask the question of going, well, like I'm unique.
Oh, froze up a bit there. Can you still hear me?
Tell me who it is.
Sorry, brother. It cut out there for a
Hey,
sec. Hey,
no, you're good.
you said I'm unique, and then I thought you were doing a dramatic pause, and then I noticed you froze. So,
uh, okay. So yeah. So the reality is, each one of us is unique, and in our uniqueness, we have to learn to be able to hear the voice that goes, hey, this is who you are. This is who I
Mm.
made you to be. This is the creation. Like, and it's learning to identify that voice inside of our like conscious. And I'm not talking about an audible voice. I'm not talking about this like, anything. I'm just talking about when little thoughts pop into our head or little things just stir inside of us. Learning to identify, is that the voice of love speaking to me, or is that my fear, my shame, my insecurities, my unbeliefs, all these things that it's talking. And so learning to identify that allows people this freedom of like, wow, I didn't realize this about myself. I didn't realize that. And so it's more of a, it's helping teach them to hear a voice that allows them to have kind of self-discovery, if you will.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think you're right. You hit the nail on the head. A lot of people act, myself included, at various stages of my life, very much act out of fear and shame and these like negative, stagnant feelings. And it's when I really felt myself getting stuck is when it's like a quicksand or a tar that you really get stuck in these that I was getting stuck in these emotions. So yeah, I know that really resonated, and I love
Yeah.
what you're saying. Even as soon as you change the subject to talking about what can you become and discovery and all that, just feels so much. The energy just changes when you phrase it like that. So yeah, super cool. I'm
And
curious.
I,
Oh yeah, go
no,
ahead.
go ahead. I was going to say, I still get stuck in fear. Like I
Right.
still, and I don't know if I ever won't. Like the
That's the
reality
thing.
is
Yeah.
I hope I get better at it as life continues. But then the reality is I'm going like, all I know I can do is begin to identify when I know it's fear, right?
Sure.
And then I can
Sure.
choose to look at it and go, what do I do with it? Uh, and so basically, yeah, because I mean, like just the other day, we got a call. My wife and I do foster care. We got a call this Sunday. Hey, can you take this kid, 12-year-old kid? And my first response is fear. Comes out fear. Oh, I'm afraid, man. What is it going to do to my family dynamic? What,
Yeah.
I don't know. And I had to stop, pause, and identify it and go, wow, do I want to live a life that operates out of fear, or do I want to live a life that operates out of love? And I said, I want to live a life that operates out of love. So basically shifting, going now asking the question, love, what does that look like to you? And they go, love the kid. You go, okay,
Cool. Beautiful.
and so it changed. And so
Yeah.
like, I think my first response is fear, and being able to pause and identify it, and then move to a different space.
Yeah, see, that's the key. Awareness it gives you a choice, the
Yeah.
response as opposed to the reaction, right? So that's really cool. What I was about to ask is, as far as your spirituality, I'm curious how that has potentially changed. Has it strengthened? Does it, change shapes, or as there like as your relationship, for example, like I'm thinking with the relationship with your wife, as it went through that, the blip in the radar, as it were, and then it came back out the other side, and it's redeveloped in a much different way. How is your spirituality? You mentioned getting losing your job as pastor and such. What is that like for you nowadays?
Um, it's still so my yeah. I mean, like I still, for me personally, I'm involved in like church, Christian church, and I never wavered in my belief at all. I still always believed that there was this God that created me and existed, and that didn't change. But what did change was um, understanding this grace that's spoken of so often in the spiritual culture, of
Mm,
this idea that like I still believe like back then, like I was trying to earn love or prove myself in a way that would allow me to be lovable. And
mm,
so now I live in a space where, so I guess when you say like what changed in my spirituality grew in such a way that I go, um, I don't have to I don't have to earn love. I don't have to earn love from the creator. I don't have to earn it. Like it's already been given to me. And so I operate out of this full abundance of like, wow, it's already there. It exists. Um, and then even like, I would say like learning to, for me, like because of all the hard stuff I've had to walk through, um, it's brought me to a space where I've learned to, there's a big difference between religion and spirituality. There's a
yeah,
very big difference, and I think that's a negative is people get hurt by religion, and so they go, "Well, I want nothing to do with it," and I'm going,
yeah,
"Yeah, religion is messy. It's full of traditions and rituals and things, and we hurt each other, and it's ugly." Um, and so, learning for me, it's been more of a step into. a relationship and what does a relationship look like and how does that work. So
Yeah, that's super cool. One thing that really jumps out at me, it sounds a lot more like it's unconditional now. Like you say, it's already
yeah.
there. There's no need to prove or like to reach this, this goal or something in order to be loved. You've been loved the whole time, sort of thing. Like that shift in mindset, which is,
What you think about it, it's very freeing because even if I was trying to earn the love of an ultimate like creator, right?
yeah,
Uh, I'm probably going to fail at it 100% of the time, or a majority of the time. And so, like,
yeah,
the reality is, like, once you realize in like that part, there's such a freedom to like, wow, I can live in my identity now and begin to figure out what that is and do and just be.
yeah. No, that's great. Really, really cool insight. I want to get a little bit into just the subject of relapses because you mentioned that was a big part of your story, and I can imagine there's a lot of listeners or viewers that myself included that have had some some issues with that. Again, some blips on the radar, if you will, that these things have happened. What what did you learn from it? Like, what was your mental state coming out of it? Like, I always speak of, for me personally, it was like I had the second arrow. It's like when you get in a car accident, and then you get angry at yourself for getting in the car accident. The situation's already bad, and yet I would dogpile on myself and make it
Oh yeah.
worse, right? So, what was it like for you with those relapses? What can you speak on that subject?
Well, I mean, at the beginning, the relapses were so packed in with shame that um yeah, they were awful because like you said, like I would just compound the shame on top of my actions, which would then spiral me down to like I'm gonna just drink more so I don't have to feel the shame. And then because I drank, I feel more shame. And it's like I just
Yeah,
call it the shame cycle, right? You're just
totally.
in it, you're stuck. And it wasn't until I think it was a therapist that I was processing this with, and they just it was like kind of like one of those aha moments where I was like, they're like, Zach, have you ever thought about not viewing a relapse like you failed, but viewing a relapse as a great opportunity to look at what you need to change so you don't get there again?
Hmm.
And so it became so then all of a sudden for me it did. There was something that shifted in my head that goes, relapses are a great opportunity for discovery.
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden, like, and it's not a justification. Like, I don't want people to hear this and be like, oh, I can relapse all I want. Let's do
Right.
it.
Yeah.
That's not the heart's like the intent of it. But the idea is like, if it does happen, instead of just getting down on yourself and full of, like, the reality is we're humans, we're going to screw up. But the question is, are we going to learn from it? So,
Right.
oh, I relapsed. Can I pick myself up and then begin to analyze going, where did that start? Because it probably didn't start when you just picked up the drink. It started before, right? So like where did it start? What was it? What was happening in my life that I started finding myself out of balance? What happened in my life where I started finding myself forgetting to do the habits that were good and began to add the bad? Like where and then once you begin to just treat it as this like discovery, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, because I that was always been my biggest tension in the idea of like AA and stuff is like we are so adamant on counting our days, and we're so adamant on when you relapse you got to show up to the rooms and raise your hand for the first 30 days saying I'm a newcomer. I'm like, that is shameful. And I did it year after year. I would show up to these rooms and be like, hey, I'm Zach alcoholic. Hey, I'm Zach, I'm alcoholic. you know, yeah, I get my 6 month chip, my 9 month chip, and I'd come back and be like, hey, I'm Zach, I'm alcoholic. And I'd have to go through it again and again and again. I remember a guy looking at me being like, I would never show back up to these rooms. He's like, he's like, I don't know how you do it.
Man.
And I honestly, I didn't either. But now I look at it and go, why do we do that? Why do we put
Sure.
people through that?
Yeah.
Versus like, why can't we say someone has 135 days and they relapse? Why can't we celebrate the 135 days and go, hey, let's pick you up again and we're going to start at 136 again?
Oh
Because
yeah.
you had those, right? You had
Yeah.
those days.
Yeah.
Like it's like we kind of throw them out as if like there was no success there.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's even like something I love to do with my people I coach is like, let's make the shift because you have to be able to celebrate when you do well and
Yeah.
hold on to that because that's going to help us move into like when we do fail, because we're all going to like may not be fail relapse drinking wise, but we're going to fail some component of life some way. And so when we do, we can pick ourselves and go up and be like, man, but look at that time period I had there. let's learn from it and then go again.
Yeah. You know, one thing that's I love that. I've never heard it, framed like that. The first thing that comes to mind, not that I'm a huge sports guy, but like picture a sport team that wins like 20 straight games or 30 straight games and then they lose one. Are you gonna is that the fans just gonna turn on the team and be like, you lost one? Or are
Yeah,
they gonna be like, holy crap, you just like set a record, like your personal record for games in a row that you won? Like what are you gonna put all your weight in, right? So
yeah.
yeah,
And then you think about it, the coach of that team that they lost the one game out of 20, he's going to bring them back into the locker room
yeah,
and say, "You guys did phenomenally well, but what happened here?" And they're going to
exactly.
learn, right? They're going to learn
Yeah.
from it, and they're going to come back into the next game probably better than they did before.
Exactly. Dude, so good. So good. I love that. That's great. I got a question for you as far as I'm always interested in, environments. The environment is so key for, maintaining sobriety or recovery. They often say you can't recover in the place that you became sick at, so forth. What is it like? I'm just so intrigued by Hawaii. By the way, I when in Rome or in Hawaii.
I appreciate the Hawaii shirt you got on
Right?
today.
This is
I
legit
do.
from Hawaii. My mom's been there, so I wanted to,
Good.
so that was, yeah, come prepared. But yeah, what is life like in Hawaii? And would it have been a different story if you were still back at Coeur d'Alene? What do you, how
I
do
don't
you,
know. So
yeah,
I got sober in Coeur d'Alene, and
interest.
I had
Okay.
and what was interesting was before we moved to Hawaii, my wife and I wanted to get out. So we got back together after everything, but the reality is we lived in a small town that everybody knew our story,
Okay.
and so we wanted to move. We were just adding on like let's get out of here, and we just felt like for us internally that we weren't allowed to leave. We were just like we can't leave yet. And it was no joke. One day I was in my office. I had a wedding photography company. I was in my office and I just felt this peace. I was like, we can go. I came home and looked at my wife. I was like, babe, I think we can leave. She's like, I know. And we moved 3 weeks later.
Really?
Uh,
Wow.
and so I was sober at the time though. And so I had gotten sobriety, but all I knew of sobriety back in Coeur d'Alene was going to AA meetings. And it was still just a white knuckle. I'm not drinking is what it was. It wasn't like I still probably wouldn't even say I had a problem with it. I was just doing that for everybody else. Um,
Yep.
and then we moved to Hawaii, and Hawaii actually was great for the first year because you're in a new area. We're at the beach every day. We're just having a blast. And then life kind of picks up, busyness and things and to dos, and all of a sudden, I find myself hiding that I'm drinking again. And
Yep.
but okay, back to your original question though. The environment of Hawaii, I feel so blessed to actually get sober here. I think just because of a couple things. Like one, if you're coming to Maui for a nightlife, there's not one. Like you just like it's like an island that like when it gets dark, everyone goes to bed, and then when it gets light, everybody gets up. Like literally,
Nice.
so many tourists come all the time. They're like, "Where's the nightlife at?" I'm like, "There's like 3 bars that are like nothing's going on at, but you can go there." Uh, and so I like the culture here. The culture here is a very like active. You surf, you snorkel, you out on hikes. You're outside, you're in nature. Uh, it's a healthy culture in that way, and so like I appreciate it. Like for me, it's um, I always laugh because I feel like the rooms of AA on the mainland are like in the basement of a church, and like the rooms of AA here are like on the beach.
Oh
Like
wow.
people show up all in their beach chairs, and you make a big circle, and you
No
have your
way.
meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and then
cool.
or yeah, so it's like there's like sunset meetings that you can just sit
Man.
and watch sunset and have your meeting, or there's this little church that's down the road that's like all kind of airy outdoor. You can see the ocean, and like I'm like this
Man.
is a beautiful place, and
Right?
so I feel very blessed to. I think environment one, it's awesome, but two, I had the right community around me, meaning that like when I was in my deep of struggling with alcohol and hiding it, I finally came out and brought it to a group of friends, and they didn't just be like pat me on the back like, oh yeah, good luck. They like walked me through it. They were like, hey, we want you to see this person, which got me into an outpatient treatment program, which you know after that, I had like men circle around my life basically and just be like, Zach, like, we're not going to let you blow your marriage up. We're just not going to let you do it. Like we're gonna stand by you and walk this out with you.
That's got to be such a huge thing for you, you know, looking back and even nowadays, like having that community. It's been a theme that, you know, it's been, you know, interspersed throughout our interview here. So yeah, community, environment. It's like, and do you still have, you know, do you still have a lot of these folks in your life, or was it sort of like, you know, dependent on your stage of recovery, or are they still very much
No,
present?
no, they're very much present. The one thing about Hawaii is it's a transient community, meaning there's a lot of people that come move here, either financially can't make it on the island or whatever reason, and they move off. So it's very transient. So we've lost some really good friends that have just moved back to mainland. But as far as community goes, it's still for me it exists. You know, I still have um, great people in my life. I still have people that I like my brother-in-law. He lives here. He's made a vow and commitment. He's never going to drink with me or in front of me or around me.
Oh wow,
You know, and he's like an average, like I'll have a beer or two every once in a while kind of guy. But
yeah,
like I watch it. I see it. You know, like we went out to dinner as a big group the other night, and everyone got a glass of wine or a beer or something. I always see him. He just doesn't.
wow,
And so
that's
there's
cool.
people that do, and I've never asked him to. It's just
Right.
something he committed to himself, and um, and so yeah, I feel like I do. I still have this strong community.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's got to be a huge one of your pillars, I imagine, of you know of your
Yep.
ongoing you know sobriety, alcohol free life that you have. So you know, I want to circle back to this. You know, the whole you know being disqualified from having your own voice, and now here you are with your own podcast. You know, getting your story out there, and you're actually doing some public speaking as well. You'd mentioned when I was on your show. So where was the shift there? And I find it also. I just want to circle back to me picturing you as a 20-year-old pastor doing all these like sermons and such. Was it was it because it wasn't your words? Like where I'm having a hard time picturing you not feeling like you don't have a voice, right? So I'm just a little bit more about that, and if you can get lead us into like what you're doing with your public speaking as well.
Yeah. So I think the feeling like I so basically I have the affair, right? And um I internally believed for some reason that I screwed up so big that like I no longer have a voice, and especially like saying a voice with inside the church more
Okay.
so.
Hmm.
So I no longer have a voice to speak inside the church anymore because I failed too big. Was my belief, and then every time I'd relapse, that would almost allow that belief to be more true, right? And so that's kind of I sat in that for so long, and then yeah, it really was for me this like when we talked about earlier, like listening to our identity. It's like I began to really believe that I have that's part of who I am. I'm a voice. I love speaking. It's not like it's just something that like you put me on a stage, and like I am nervous as all get up before I get on there, and then as soon as I do it, I switch clicks, and I'm like happy as could be,
Hmm.
and 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 so knowing that the podcast I think was kind of step one for all of a sudden being like, hey, I'm gonna begin to share this, I'm gonna begin to and like my story got out there, so then all of a sudden I was like, my story's not a big deal anymore, and then I got asked to kind of speak at a conference, and the conference was kind of called the Day of Influence, and it was like a kind of a wellness like theme to it. And so, I got a chance to share my story, and my message was, how do we walk like the how do we walk through shame? Like how do we get from point A to B and through shame? And so yeah, I mean, I would love to say that I'm on like a full like the goal I think for me would be is, I would love to be on a speaking like thing where I'm speaking constantly and traveling and speaking, and
Totally.
um not there yet, you know. I'm getting to speak more. I'm loving it, but yeah, so I think for me it was like the recognizing my identity, beginning to take small steps forward. So small steps was like the podcast. It was going on other people's podcasts. Then beginning to like just say like I will speak when anybody asks me. Like I
Mm.
committed to, I've always said that like if anyone ever asks, hey Zach, can you speak? I say yeah. I don't care
Mm.
if it's to a group of kindergartners or to thousands of people. Like I'm just like yeah, I'm in.
Yeah. Cool.
So yeah.
So that's definitely one of the ones that's just like, yeah, like you say, it's a top priority, top of mind. If you do get an opportunity, regardless, it's a absolutely, like it's a yes, it's
Yeah,
a
and
10
I
for
think
you.
that, yeah, and regardless of what the speaking is, it's like you always get to hone your craft and your skill, and it gives you something to work on. And so, like to me, I'm like, uh, I get to do. So there's an app called Lived, which is like a sober support app. Basically, it's an awesome. Listen to like 3 day. You can listen to like a 3 day course or a 7 day course, or you can. One of my favorite things that they do is they call it like moments. So like we all have moments where we know we're going to be maybe a little bit more tempted to drink or struggle,
Mm,
and you can have the app where you can click on the moment that's specific. So like airports, for example, right?
sure.
Airports like a trigger for so many people because everybody drinks any time of day in there,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so like if you're in the airport, you can click on the app and there's going to be like somebody like myself that's going to just talk to you. Be like, hey, I know you're in the airport right now. It's really hard. Let's talk through it. Um, so it's a cool app, but what it's done for me is it's created a platform where they asked me to basically put content together and talk. And so I love it because it gives me another place to get to speak. So
That's really cool. Sorry, what was the app called? It's called
lived,
Oh,
LIV, lived, like
Lived.
Lived.
Got it.
Yep.
Good. Okay, I'll check it out for sure. Lived. Awesome, dude. As we'll wind down, I got a couple closing questions for you. One is
Yeah.
specifically I remembered from our podcast that we did, and you'd mentioned I can't remember if it was actually on the show or in our preamble there, but you have something to do with your wife, and you sort of alluded to it earlier in our interview here about just being like super open with her about how you guys are feeling. It's almost like a daily check-in. Correct me if I'm
Yep.
wrong. That you guys
No.
do, and you just have that open ability to be just like literally just go, hey, however I'm feeling, there's no judgment, and that's just this way of you guys really staying connected. So I'd love it if you could illustrate that for the audience, please.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that my wife and I've learned to do, and I'm not going to take any credit for it because I think she was the one that brought up the idea, uh, was we we try to connect. So we have three of our own kids. We have foster kids in and out of the house. Our house is busy. So usually what we try to do is when I come home from work, we're training our children to know like say hi to dad, give hugs, and then mom and dad get like 5 minutes of time. And that's when we try to do it. And so, but what it is, it's just a check in. It's just a like the simple question of like, give me two or three. And I tell people when they're starting out doing this, just one's good, and then try to get to three. But the idea is like, what are like three feelings that you've been experiencing today? Like, what are three feelings that you've had? And for me, I love it because it forces me as I'm coming home to like reflect on my day already and be like, how am I feeling? Oh, I'm really discouraged because this has happened at work, or I'm really excited, or I'm. And what's funny is I think we as humans can only think of a couple different feeling words because we've been programmed. So I actually print out a feeling sheet that I have in my truck. So every like I'll be driving sometimes I'll pull it out and be like, that's how I'm feeling. I couldn't even name it. I didn't know what it
Yeah,
was, but
totally.
when I saw it, it connected to me. And then we come home basically and I share my feelings. She doesn't try to solve them or anything. She just hears them. She shares her feelings. I don't try to solve them. We just hear it, and then we basically can move from that space together. uh, yeah, so that's one thing we do, and then the other thing that we do is more on a once a week kind of thing. And it's like it's a really healthy space. We actually learned this, I think, in our premarital classes like 17 years ago. I call it the 5 A's, and I can't even tell you what the 5 A's stand for. But the first one is an affirmation. So you
Mm,
affirm each other. That's it. You just affirm like, "Hey, I love you today because I saw you do this," or "I love you this week because of this," whatever it is.
mhm.
So you affirm the person to begin with, and then you ask the question: is there anything that I have done that have frustrated or bothered you this week?
Oh wow,
And
yeah.
the beauty of asking it is if I didn't ask, my wife would tell me anyways, but I wouldn't be at a space where I'm ready to hear it. Right. I might
Sure.
be busy doing something, or then I'll jump to the defense because she shared something that
Yeah.
bothered her. But when I ask, I'm ready to receive it. So I go, oh, I hear that.
Yeah.
I can work on that. And then she asks the same question back and forth. And then you ask the question, is there anything I can do for you this week? And that's the opportunity to say, I need you to take this check to the post office, please. I've
Totally.
asked you so many times, but like the reality is you're present, you're there, so you can go, I can do that or I can't. versus when you're running out the door and they ask you to do something. And then the last one is affection and amen. So cuddle, kiss, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and then pray together. So we try to do that on a weekly basis, and that's kind of our biggest dose of like we get to share like what made us mad. We get to share what we're asking we need help with. And so yeah.
Dude, I love that, and it's in a safe spot, like you say. It's, the context is everything in that case, right? You're open to it. That's the safe
Yep.
spot that you guys have created, and as a result, I'm sure you can just work through a lot of gunk that would otherwise accumulate and perhaps come
Yep.
out in ways that you don't care to, right?
Well,
So,
I think that is the basis of relationship, right? Like the
right,
reality is I think most conflicts in relationship come out of because we're both in two different places
totally,
mentally, like emotionally, and then the one person just goes, "Hey, this made me mad that you did this," and the other person's like, "I'm not ready for that." But
right,
like, learn like so like in our marriage, I mean, we have business meetings. We literally put business meetings on the calendar because you got to have meetings like financially talks and insurance and stuff that's
yeah,
not fun. That's life,
totally,
adulting things.
adulting stuff,
But
yeah,
yeah, but if you put it on the calendar, if I own a business, I'm going to have business meetings.
hundred
So
percent,
I own a family, and so let's have meetings around it where I'm prepared. It's like just setting
yeah.
yourself up to be mentally prepared for whatever you're walking into.
Dude, that's amazing. It's so simple, but like honestly, you guys are like the
Yeah,
first like relationship that I've heard that goes to quite that extent. So kudos to
yeah.
you guys. Thanks for so much for coming on the show today. I know we touched on this on your episode. I'm certain I asked you, but for anybody that hasn't listened, this is always my show stopping question here. What is being authentic, and authenticity mean to you?
Oh, what is being authentic? Uh, I just think it means learning to live inside of your identity and not somebody else's.
Ooh,
Uh, the reality is, I think the world doesn't need another me. The world doesn't need another you. You're already it, right? And so
yeah,
let's stop trying to be each other and figure out who we are
yeah,
and like live in that. And like authentic, I don't know. Authenticity means like it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to be have a down day. It's okay to be like I think we so often put this Instagram persona on life. Like we have to have it all figured out and be happy all the time. And I'm like, no, like it's okay. Like there's gonna be tough. Like just learning to be you and be okay with the emotions that it brings.
mm, good answer. Really good answer. And
Thanks,
final
Matt.
question: where can we find you online? Anybody wants to reach out to you? What's the easiest way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, best way is braving the journey. Bravingthejourney.com, braving the journey on Instagram. Uh, you can call me. My phone number is 808-280-8952. You can call or text me. I yeah, I want to be available for people. So however you need to reach out, I'm there. So
That's awesome. I'm what was it? 808. I don't think I have the
808
shorts. Yeah.
no 808 two
Yeah.
eight zero
280
eight nine five two.
8952. Awesome.
Yep.
Zach, any final
Well,
words before we I'll have everything in the show notes, of course, where to find you. Any final words before we put a wrap on this thing?
I just want to say, man, I appreciate you. I love that you like beyond recovery, what you guys are doing. I mean, it's to
Thank
me,
you.
I'm like, yeah, it's fun. I haven't been a guest on a show in a while, and I'm like, I like this. That was fun for me. And you
Yeah.
did. I love it. You did a great job. Like I just am like, yeah,
Thanks, man.
perfect. So thanks.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, dude, for coming on the show. We're definitely keep in touch and enjoy Hawaii, my friend.
Thanks.